In last week's video, I showed off my rescore of the opening title sequence from Severance. Today, I want to explain some of the compositional choices I made and how I wrote that piece of music. Whenever I do a rescoring project, the first thing I do is take the original video that I'm rescoring and mute it and watch it through completely without any sound from the original. That way I can have an idea of what's happening on screen, the tone, the beats, the moments, without being influenced by what the original sound was. This was particularly hard for Severance because I'm very familiar with that title sequence. A lot of shows I will skip the title sequence before watching the main bulk of episodes, but with Severance, when me and my partner watched it, we basically watched the title sequence every single episode because it's just so good. So we were really familiar with that music, which made it a little bit hard for me to write something original, but watching it through without sound helps to disconnect from that original music. And that's what I did with this one as well. When thinking about the tone of Severance, both the show and the opening title sequence, for me, it's very mysterious and a little bit obscure and out of the ordinary. So an immediate point of reference that I went to was Your Hate Could Power a Train, a song by Madison Cunningham, which has this incredible chromatic styled riff. I love the sound of that riff, the way it moves windingly and kind of is unpredictable. So that's what I wanted to do, something similar to that from my rescore of Severance. And that's how I came up with this riff. I really like the sound, and it took me a little bit of tweaking to get the right chromatic intervals. It opens with a tritone leap from B up to F, and then down to C natural, which is the flat 9 above that B. So already within the first 3 notes, we're hitting some really uncommon notes in a scale based on B. Then there's a leap up to G sharp, down to G natural, the 6, and then the flat 6. Both kind of uncommon, and very uncommon to have both of them together in a single riff within one key. From here, I knew I wanted to end the riff with another tritone leap somewhere in there, and I also wanted to move chromatically up from A sharp to B to restart the riff on a loop. So if I had to finish on an A sharp up to B and I wanted another tritone, I basically just had to put the E as the last note. So the full riff goes from the root, flat 5, flat 2, 6, minor 6, 4, leading tone, and then back to 1. It's kind of winding and doesn't have a real harmonic center, which I think gets the effect that I wanted, that Your Hate Could Power a Train like chromatic ambiguity. So I had this riff. I also knew that at the ending I wanted a note bending up as the title card Severance appears. So I reformed the ending of the riff on a repetition to pause on the E, go down to an A, and then bend that up to the root note B. So the full riff sequence sounds like this. I knew that that riff was going to be too aggressive for the start of the opening title sequence, so I wanted something a little bit lighter. That's where I went to harmonics on the guitar, and I came up with this little pattern playing some harmonics. Now the riff that you've already heard was not what I first came up with. I originally composed the riff in E. But because the harmonic passage that I'd just written worked a little bit better centered on B, I transposed the original riff down to B. I knew I wanted the track to build up towards that final full version of the riff, so I came up with a more simplified version. I figured the first 4 notes of the riff could serve as a basic bass line under the early parts of the track, which could then gradually evolve into the full riff. So it started with this simplified version of the riff, which then in the middle section has some extra hits thrown in. We start to add a lower G sharp and G. Then it goes up to the higher part and starts to play a little bit closer to the full version of the riff. Starting from the basic 4-note version of the riff, then adding the 5th and 6th notes in the riff, was an effective way to build up towards the final full version. Now that I had the framework of the entire piece, I took those riffs and mapped them out timing-wise, worked out in a few cases where I needed to stick a bar of 2/4 rather than just having 4/4 all the way out, and then I could start to fill in the spaces with some other parts, other accompanying parts, and of course eventually a melody. The next thing that I came up with was an answering phrase to the opening harmonics. Those harmonics are quite high and ethereal, so I wanted something dark and brooding on the low end of the guitar. I composed this little answering phrase with a B, F sharp going up to a C sharp, so 1, 5, and 9 in the key that I had composed in. To help make this phrase and the opening a little bit more mysterious, the phrase, as it repeats, changes the F sharp upper semitone to G to get that flat 6, which also creates a tritone against the C sharp. This part is also given some more mystery and intrigue from Neural DSP's archetype Rabea X. It comes with this great delay with these weird glitchy trails, which just really helps with ambient background parts like this. I felt that guitar was a little bit much to play the riff all the way through, so bass became the center point. When the riff comes in, it starts on the bass and then gradually builds up with guitar. After the harmonic intro, I decided to cut back a whole bunch of layers and bring in just the bass before building up eventually into the full riff and melody. To help with that cutoff, I added this delayed part. It has an 8th note and a dotted 8th delay, and it's played on a nice clean plucked guitar. It really creates a nice clean and open sound that really contrasted from the spacious sound of the opening with all the delay trails on the harmonics and that lower part. Cutting back to just the bass and this clean delayed guitar was a really effective transition. Originally that transition happened a bar earlier, but I found that pushing it back a bar helped time it up with a visual cue of Adam Scott's character walking through these doors and the color palette changing from white to black. It was around this point that I needed to come up with a melody, and I basically improvised the melody over the top of the riffing that I had already created. The riff is already in kind of a diminished B minor-y kind of feel, so I wrote the melody in B minor with the addition of some F naturals to give that diminished kind of feel. I started with lead guitar, Rhodes, and synths for the melody. I found that any one single instrument wasn't quite enough, but these 3, or technically 4 because there's 2 synth parts, having these 4 parts play the melody in unison made for a really confident melody line that also felt connected to the other instruments in the ensemble. The B section of the melody, where the riff starts to add more parts of the final version of the riff, I had some trouble. I had to make sure that as these more complicated dissonant notes get added into the riff, the notes of the melody didn't clash, and it took a little bit of back and forth to make sure that the right notes were cutting off in the right places. Also in the B section of the melody, I decided to double the melody in octave strings, just to really increase the size of the melody. The music is just getting bigger, and having these big layered orchestral string sound alongside the keys and synthesizer really helped to bulk up that melody and make it soar over the top of the rhythm section parts. And that's the bulk of how I composed my rescore. But I want to talk about a few other specific details that I thought were a bit fun. I really love the sound of a snare rim click. It's just one of my most favourite percussion sounds. I've had one of my percussionist friends listen through to some mixes of an upcoming project, and one of their criticisms was that in one of my tracks the click sound was a little bit too much, and basically I said that's how I wanted it. I really love a really present snare click, so I have a little trick for making snare clicks really pop out in a mix and sound a little bit more nuanced than just stick on rim. I'm on record as having said that I love the sound design of the Nintendo Switch, and one of the most iconic sounds of that device is that click sound. Now it has a bit too much of a recognizable sound to use on its own, but when you pair it with a drum click, and then mix that into a drum groove, It just adds a layer that is really satisfying to that drum sound. I really love it, and I included it in this rescore. Another detail is that swell into that opening harmonic. When I have sounds like this, I can search for samples or make my own, but I find that it's hard to get exactly what I want, and usually the best way to communicate what I want is to make that sound with my voice. So that's what this sample is. It's just 3 or 4 tracks of me going shh, and then blending that with some effects and reverb. One of my common sound design hacks is that when I can't find the sound that I want, I just make the sound with my voice and then augment it, layer it, until I get exactly what I want. I just find that it's really useful to be able to make the sound that I want with my mouth to be able to get to that final sound. Sometimes I might cut my voice out once I get there with other sounds, and I just use that original voice recording as a framework, but oftentimes it stays there right to the very end because it just is exactly what I want and I'm able to make it expressively with my mouth and my voice. The last detail I want to talk about is those glitchy sounds at the end. Glitchy sounds have always been hard for me to make. There's lots of different devices that can do it, but oftentimes because they're designed to make weird and unusual and broken sounds, it can be hard to tweak them to get exactly what you want without going too crazy or being too subtle. A plugin that I discovered a while back is Lisa's codec. It does a great job of creating down-sampled effects, kind of like taking high quality audio and then compressing it down to MP3 and then even lower and even lower. Has these great simple dials of loss and bitrate that really help to create glitchy and compressed and digital artifacty sounds, and it really is kind of just a cheat code for getting these glitchy sounds. So at the end of the rescore where the visuals are kind of flashing back and forth to create that glitchy sound, I really just automated some parameters on codec to go up to create that glitchy sound, and I think it was a really simple, perfect fix for that glitchy sound at the end. It's a really simple and really effective way to get those glitchy sounds, and I think it really worked for the end of this track. So that's how I composed and recorded my rescore of the opening title sequence from Severance. If you didn't see last week's video, I've linked it down below so that you can watch and enjoy, see my full composition with that visual. Since then, I have seen the first episode of the new season of Severance, and I'm very excited to see what happens. It looks like it's going to live up to the quality of the first season. That opening sequence in particular was just amazing, and the cinematography is just blowing me away. The quality has not dipped, and I'm hoping it just continues like that for the rest of the season. If so, we're in for a good ride. That's all for now. If you have any questions about my compositional process, leave them down in the comments below. I'm always looking at comments and answering them when there are questions there. So hopefully I see you there in the comments, and if not, I'll catch you in the next video.